Hi, my name is Omeed Dariani. I'm the Senior Brand Manager of the Everquest franchise. Welcome to another edition of the Roundtable. I'm here today with first-time Roundtable participant. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway, Mr. Dave Georgeson. Dave, do you want to tell everyone, the three people who are living under the rock, who you are and what you do?
Why, yes, I would, Omeed. I'm Dave Georgeson. I'm the Director of Development for the Everquest franchise.
He's kind of a big deal. And so we're really, really thrilled to have him on here. Now, Dave is really involved in every one of our questions, making sure that we're talking about things that are actually being talked about internally. So this week, we're talking about contested content and whether there should be contested content in Everquest Next. Now, the vast majority of people, or again, the plurality of people, because we've actually taught people this word, which makes me happy.
You gave me a bad time about my vocabulary.
The plurality of people, 46% of people right now, have said that they want to see a mix of contested and non-contested content. But before we get to that, could you tell us, can we talk about the historical context and what contested content is?
Well, sure. I mean, in a traditional MMO, and in fact in Everquest and Everquest 2, there's non-contested and contested content. And basically non-contested is stuff where you go into an instance and it's your own little private pocket reality and no other players are in there except for you and your group. So obviously it's not contested. Contested is everything else. So there's dungeons that are specifically contested dungeons where you're essentially competing against other players for the same spawns and the same bosses. And then there's everything out in the overland, which is effectively contested, although usually the population is sparse enough that it doesn't feel as contested as the dungeons.
Right, and a lot of times when we're talking about this, we're talking specifically about the things that are highly contested, right? Like I think about in EQ, and right, people are camping the pieces of content that we would call contested a lot of times.
Sure, yeah, I mean that's traditional, especially back in old EQ, back in the wild and woolly days when it first started. I camped just about every camp there was in Guck. It's like, these are our 7 mobs, nobody else can have them, you can move to your own room. I mean that's the way it was when it was really, really saturated and there was a ton of people. Nowadays, you can go into lots and lots of content in EQ and EQ2, and even though it's a contested dungeon, you might not feel like that at all. Mm-hmm. In EQ2, I've played Sanctum the Scaleborn so many times because I just love that dungeon. I think it's really fun because you find your own level of difficulty in it. But there's always people running through it, and it adds variety, it adds spice because you're never sure where the next spawn is going to be. You're never really sure when they're going to repop on you, and so it adds a little bit more excitement, and I like risk.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like that kind of feeling.
So one of the things we saw in a lot of the conversation on the roundtable was about how this relates to PvP. So when we talk about contested content, are we talking about things like open world PvP or battlegrounds?
Oh, no, this has nothing to do with PvP. PvP is a completely separate thing. I mean, when we get to PvP and we start talking about it, of course there will be ramifications of PvP in a contested area versus a non-contested area, but that's not what we're talking about right now at all.
So right now we're really debating how much of the content should be, attackable by multiple players at a time.
Right.
And so, for Everquest Next, what does this look like? What are we thinking?
Yeah, well, first of all, Everquest Next is a really different critter. Because we have the emergent AI and the populations of the monsters and the villagers and the NPCs, everybody, are constantly pushing people around. There's no such thing as a case of static spawns. You go out and you beat up the orc camp a few times, it's going to move. And this includes not just the outdoors, but the indoors also. So the traditional way of competing for contested stuff, where you camp a room, that's really unlikely to be successful in EQN. You're going to need to go out and find out where those monsters moved, what's happening with the population. They'll be pushing each other around. It's just not the same kind of thing. So a large part of Everquest Next is technically contested, but that's because you're finding your own encounters, your own adventures, and it's not the same old camper room kind of thing.
Right. It's not set up in that way where a whole bunch of people are coming to the same place over and over because they know exactly this is where the thing I need spawns, this is where that rare monster spawns.
Right. And we're also very aware of the fact that if you have thousands and thousands of people in the same world, they may, for instance, be interested in the same area at the same time. So we have some pretty clever ideas on how we're going to approach that, but we're still proving some of it works. So we'll wait until a later day to relate how we're going to deal with that. But Well, if it works the way we planned, it is pretty clever. I think people will really like it.
Yeah. I've heard some of the guys talking about it. It's pretty cool stuff.
It's not bad.
So, I mean, one of the things that I thought was really cool about this particular question is we're starting to see the conversation expand beyond just our roundtable discussion. You know, there were almost as many comments on Reddit as there were on the roundtable. You know, there are several articles around, and we think it's awesome when we actually are seeing these conversations happen all across the internet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the stuff we hoped for when we started. When it was your idea, it was a great idea. The roundtable was a really good idea. Get people discussing with us on a regular basis, because the discussions that we start on the roundtable propagate everywhere. And we get, if you do a Google filter, you find all that stuff automatically. You just have it come into you. So we're reading conversations all over the net all the time, and that lets us debate internally a lot more intelligently.
Yeah, absolutely. We see the conversations actually, I think, evolve a lot on the other sites, and that feeds into how we may ask another question in the future, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool. So, again, I think we're kind of thinking the same thing as most of the folks out there. Everquest Next is such a different critter, as Dave used, one of my favorite terms, such a different critter than the MMOs that have come before it, that it's going to feel a little different. But I think you guys are going to be happy with the direction we're going. So I want to thank Dave for his time and for showing up, and we'll try to get him to come back to the roundtable more often.
Glad to.
And thank you guys again for participating. We'll be talking to you guys all over the internet.
Thanks.
Sony.